The theater lights were already bright, but nothing about that morning felt warm for the boy standing backstage. He stood still, holding the microphone with both hands, as if letting go would make the world slip away from him. His shoes were worn thin, the edges frayed and dusty from years of walking cracked sidewalks in Chicago. His jacket was too big, clearly borrowed, sleeves covering part of his hands. He kept looking down at the floor, counting the tiny scratches in the black stage paint, trying to slow his breathing. Every sound around him felt louder than it should have been. The murmurs of the crowd beyond the curtain, the footsteps of stagehands, the distant echo of someone laughing. For most kids his age, this moment would be terrifying. For him, it was something else entirely. It was hope mixed with fear, desperation mixed with courage. He had grown up on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood most people only talked about on the news. Sirens were as normal as birdsong. Winter was cruel, biting through thin walls and broken heaters. His mother used to say that the cold taught people how to survive, but some nights it felt like the cold was trying to teach them how to disappear. He lived with his mom and younger sister in a small apartment where the heat worked only when it wanted to. His father had left years earlier, not with anger or shouting, but with silence. One day he was there, the next day his side of the bed was empty, and it stayed that way. Music entered his life quietly. It wasn't planned. There were no lessons, no instruments neatly lined up in a bedroom. It started with an old radio his mother found at a thrift store for a few dollars. The antenna was bent, the sound crackled, but it worked. On nights when the power flickered or when the weight of the world felt too heavy, she would turn it on and let it play while she cooked or folded laundry. One night, a song came on that stopped him in his tracks. A simple melody, a voice filled with pain and strength at the same time. He didn't know the singer's name then. He just knew that when the voice rose, something inside his chest rose with it. From that night on, he sang whenever he could. He sang quietly at first, afraid of bothering the neighbors, afraid of being laughed at. He sang while walking to school, his breath fogging up in the cold air. He sang while doing homework, while helping his sister practice spelling words. Music became the one place where he didn't feel poor, or small, or invisible. In songs, he could be anything. Brave, strong, free. School wasn't easy. Kids noticed his worn clothes, the way he sometimes fell asleep in class because the noise outside his window never really stopped at night. Some days he was teased, other days ignored. But there were moments when he sang in the hallway or during a talent show, and everything changed. Teachers paused. Students listened. For a few minutes, the noise of life softened, and all that mattered was the sound of his voice. Those moments kept him going. The idea of auditioning for America's Got Talent felt impossible at first. He had seen the show on a small TV at a neighbor's place, watched people from all over the world stand in front of judges like Simon Cowell. Those people seemed larger than life. They came from places that felt far away from his reality. But his mother believed in him with a quiet, fierce faith. She told him that miracles didn't come looking for people. People had to walk toward them, even if their legs were shaking. They didn't have money for fancy preparation. There was no vocal coach, no special outfit. Just his voice, his story, and a bus ride that felt longer than any journey he had ever taken. When they arrived, the building itself felt intimidating. Bright lights, cameras everywhere, people whispering and rushing around. He felt small again, but then he remembered all the nights he had sung into the darkness, believing someone, somewhere, might hear him. When his name was called, his heart nearly stopped. He stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding at first. The audience was a blur of faces, but the judge's table was clear. Simon Cowell sat there with his familiar serious expression, arms crossed. Heidi smiled gently. Howie leaned forward, curious. Sophia's eyes were warm and encouraging. He swallowed hard, introduced himself in a soft voice, and shared a little about where he came from. As he spoke about Chicago, about his family, his voice trembled. The room grew quiet. Simon asked him why he was there. The boy paused, thinking carefully. He said he was there because he wanted to give his mom a better life, because he wanted his sister to believe dreams were real, because music was the only thing that ever made him feel like he mattered. There was no drama in his words, no rehearsed speech. Just honesty. Simon nodded slightly, as if he understood more than he let on. Then came the moment. The music started, soft and slow. He closed his eyes for just a second, imagining himself back in that small apartment, the radio humming in the background. When he opened his mouth and sang the first note, something shifted in the room. It wasn't just good, it was raw. His voice carried years of struggle, of nights spent listening to sirens, of dreams whispered into the dark. It cracked slightly in places, not from lack of skill, but from emotion. And that made it real. As the song built, so did the energy in the theater. Audience members leaned forward, some covered their mouths in disbelief. His mother watched from backstage, hands clasped together, tears streaming down her face. On the judges' table, reactions began to change. Howie's eyes widened. Heidi pressed her hand to her chest. Sophia blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. Simon, known for his tough critiques, sat unusually still, his gaze fixed on the boy. The chorus hit, and the boy's voice soared. It was powerful but controlled, filled with a longing that felt universal. He wasn't just singing a song. He was telling his life story without saying a single extra word. The room felt suspended in that sound, as if time itself had paused to listen. By the time he reached the final note, the audience was already on its feet. The applause erupted before the music fully faded. Cheers echoed through the theater, loud and overwhelming. The boy stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do. He had never heard applause like that before. It felt unreal, like something meant for someone else. The judges stood as well. Simon was the last to rise, but when he did, it mattered. He walked closer to the edge of the table, looking at the boy with an expression that surprised everyone. He told him that voices like his didn't come around often, that what he had just done was more than a performance. It was a moment. He said that the boy reminded everyone why the show existed in the first place. Then Simon paused. The crowd held its breath. He reached back and pressed the golden buzzer. The sound exploded through the theater. Golden confetti rained down from above, covering the stage in shimmering light. The boy's eyes went wide, his hands shaking as he looked around, unable to believe what was happening. He dropped to his knees, overwhelmed. Tears streamed down his face as the reality finally sank in. This wasn't just a yes. This was a promise that his voice had been heard. His mother ran onto the stage, wrapping him in a tight embrace. They cried together under the falling gold, two people who had carried so much weight finally allowed to feel joy. Without fear, the audience cried with them. Millions watching at home would cry too, seeing not just a talented singer, but a story of resilience, of hope, of what can happen when courage meets opportunity. In the days that followed, his life began to change in ways he never imagined. Interviews, messages from strangers, people telling him his voice gave them hope. But through it all, he remained grounded. He still talked about his neighborhood, about kids like him who felt forgotten. He said he wanted to prove that where you start doesn't have to decide where you end. On the live shows, he continued to deliver performances that touched hearts. Each song felt like another chapter of his journey. He sang with gratitude, with humility, with the same honesty that had carried him from a small apartment in Chicago to one of the biggest stages in the world. Simon watched him closely, often smiling, sometimes visibly moved. It was clear that this wasn't just another contestant. This was someone special. America watched as the poor boy from Chicago grew into a symbol of possibility. Parents held their children closer. Strangers hugged. Social media filled with messages about hope and perseverance. His story reminded people that talent can come from anywhere, that beauty often grows in the hardest places. No matter how far he went in the competition, one thing was certain. That golden buzzer moment had already changed his life forever. It had shown him that his voice mattered, that his pain had purpose, that dreams were not just for the lucky or the rich. They were for anyone brave enough to stand under bright lights, open their mouth, and let their truth be heard. And somewhere in Chicago, on a cold night, a small radio still played music, carrying a familiar voice into the darkness, reminding the world that sometimes, the most powerful sound is hope.